Alright, here we are, part 2. Sorry, YouTube cut me off at 8 minutes there. I have to remember that the videos will only last up through 8 minutes. We're talking about 3 different readings. Please do these 3 different readings about the disco movement. 75 to 79 died a sudden death. And ironically, Gloria Gaynor's huge hit, I Will Survive, that you hear at every wedding reception you go to. I Will Survive, 1979, one of the last big hits of the disco era. I Will Survive, as disco was dying. In Chapter 21, again, we're backing up just a week on anti-rock. Please read all of Chapter 21, great discussion of punk music, which we will go into next week, but also a good discussion of disco music and a certain pop culture phenomenon that happened in 1979 at Chicago's Comiskey Park at a ball game where 50,000 anti-disco fans brought their disco records to be smashed and blown up. The Anti-Disco Rally 1979. We do have 2 readings posted in the folder from other books. Here's the first book, Appetite for Self-Destruction, about Steve Knopper, the spectacular crash of the record industry in the digital age. We have a reading from this book about that same incident. Steve Knopper was a disco hater in his day, but then he makes the point that, well, it seems rather strange that we hated disco so much just so we could listen to Foreigner and Journey and Boston and Leonard Skinner. And he sees disco as an obvious evolution from the earlier soul of Sly and the Family Stone and Stevie Wonder and Parliament, P-Funk, George Clinton, and then evolving later into hip-hop and rap styles. So he sees it now as a logical evolution. And the third book, again, a couple of pages from this book are included in your folder, so please read those, by Nelson George, famous black writer, writes on black music. Very good writer, very good book, and really has some insights into black music. And he's also written a history of Motown records, so check that out if you can. The Death of Rhythm and Blues by Nelson George. Nelson George takes a different view. He says the early 70s black music was very vital, the music of Sly and the Family Stone, etc. And it was bastardized and watered down by Euro trash elements in the late 70s and turned into disco, which ruined black music, according to him. And so we have 2 very differing views of disco music. Please read all of that stuff. The white musicians really adopted the disco beat. And remember, the disco beat was the incessant bass drum, always the same tempo, bass drum pounding, never doing any other rhythm except what we call quarter note rhythms, 1, 2, 3, 4, always the same tempo, so the DJ in the club could mix from one disco record to the next, so you'd have non-stop music as we snorted our cocaine and danced and danced and danced the night away. Non-stop music, always to the same beat. But the rock bands adopted this also. Some of the rock musicians, rock music that adopted the disco style. Rod Stewart, Do You Think I'm Sexy? Blondie, Heart of Glass.
Avast virus database has been updated.
Sorry about that. That's my Avast. I've got to figure out how to turn that off. But my Avast virus has been updated. Wonderful. Where was I? Rod Stewart, Do You Think I'm Sexy? Blondie, Heart of Glass. Blondie, a great new wave punk band, and just jumped on the disco bandwagon. Very sad. Kiss even had a disco type song with I Was Made for Lovin' You. Queen, you know the Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust, probably the biggest hit of all these we're talking about. The Rolling Stones had a disco song, Miss You. So disco crossed over into the rock and roll segment. But by 79, there was a huge backlash against disco, and there was the rally at Comiskey Park. 50,000 fans showed up, anti-disco rally. They tore up the field. There were fights. There were arrests. And the author of Anti-Rock also makes the point that possibly the anti-disco movement was somewhat homophobic, somewhat racist, and again they were fighting for their right to listen to Foreigner and Leonard Skinner, and also possibly the idea is brought up that possibly this might have been sort of a class warfare. The lower middle class rockers, their right to rock, versus the snooty upper class who were hanging out in Studio 54 and snorting their cocaine and being so wonderfully rebellious. The politicians, the rock stars. and the upper crust. So the upper crust in Studio 54 and their disco music versus the lower middle class and their rock and roll. And by 1979, disco is dying out, and by 1980-81, it is dead. And there you go, part 2, disco and its untimely death in 1979.